how daring entrepreneurs build legendary startups, how Sequoia became a venture capital category king, and what it's like to be a Silicon Valley young gun. All right. What did the Ramones say? They said, hey ho, let's go, and that's what we're going to do. I'm so glad you're joining us today for this episode of Legends and Losers. This episode sits at the heart of our mission, and we have a great dialogue with two of the most impressive younger venture capitalists working today in Silicon Valley in technology, Matt Miller and Pat Grady, from none other than the legendary Sequoia. And I've gotten to know both of these guys over a last handful of years, and just incredibly impressive. And they're open and they're candid, they're funny, and they're insightful in our attempt here to unpack what it takes to build legendary businesses, legendary life, and in their case, what it takes to be awesome Silicon Valley young guns, if you will, legends in the making, who, if I had to predict, I'd say over the next 20 to 30, maybe even more years, both Matt and Pat will have incredible careers and will go down in history as legendary VCs and gurus in venture capital in Silicon Valley. So let me tell you a little bit about them. Matt Miller's passion for technology and entrepreneurship began as a kid. He shares a really funny story about how he got into tech and entrepreneurship on today's episode. So I'm not going to tell you anything about it. You'll better hear it from him. He graduated from Brigham Young University. He started off as an entrepreneur, and then he worked at Goldman Sachs for a while. And now he's a partner at Sequoia, focused on growth stage investments in tech companies. He's also a husband and a dad, and he's going to tell us a little bit about that. Pat Grady, a very insightful, a guy with a very large IQ, and a very affable guy as well. He worked his way through school in manual labor jobs and was a hustler doing inside sales, ultimately graduated from Boston College in finance, economics, and math. And today he's also a partner at Sequoia, focused on growth stage startups. Here we go. The Sequoia Young Guns on Legends and Losers. So, Pat and Matt, how old were you when you knew you wanted to be a venture capitalist? What, 3 or 4? Did you have venture capitalist pajamas?
You know, for me, it started when I was a kid in kind of the middle school years, early high school years, and that I was a total socially rejected nerd. It was the 1990s, and I was hearing about everything happening up in Silicon Valley. I was building computers. I had a BBS service of my own, was logging into BBS services left and right.
And just so we're clear, you grew up in
Orange County, California. And
for those and people who don't know what a BBS is,
that is like an old service that you used to. So the early eras of the internet is where you would connect your modem and dial into another service and be able to trade messages and share files and collaborate.
It's before Al Gore invented the browser, right?
It's before Al Gore took us all forward to this new brave era. But I always had this gravitation towards what was going on in technology, and I had like this appetite to come closer to Silicon Valley and be part of Silicon Valley. And it was a few years later, when I was actually in college, when I started to read more about what was going on in Silicon Valley with the venture capitalist world of VCs and funding these great companies. And I always said to myself in the back of my mind, man, I'd love to be able to have the opportunity to do that one day and to be able to help some of these great businesses be built and be created. But my fascination with the Valley started at a very early age.
Wow. I was kidding, but it turns out that's the case. What about you, Pat?
So my story starts a little bit later.
Around 6 or 7?
I'm from Wyoming originally, and most people hear about Wyoming, and particularly in the Bay Area, you hear Wyoming, you think Jackson Hole. So if you were in Jackson Hole, which is a wonderful ski destination and a nice outdoors place, if you're in Jackson Hole and you get in your car and you start driving east, and you drive for about 7 hours, you eventually end up on the other side of the state in a town called Gillette, which is right in the middle of the Powder River Basin. which is notable for one thing and one thing only, and that is the Powder River.
The razors?
Nope, no association with the razors.
Come on, man.
Sorry. And when you throw one down the middle of the plate, Pat, I got to hit it.
But it's coal country. So they produce about 40% of the nation's coal, which is about 40% of the nation's power. And so the whole town revolves around the coal mining industry. So suffice to say, tech was not something that was kind of top and center of my mind when I was growing up. When I went to college, my freshman year, actually, one of the guys on my hall.
Where'd you go to school, Pat?
I went to Boston College. And for any BC grads who may be listening, I was on Costco First. So on Costco First at Boston College, the guy 2 doors down, his dad was a venture capitalist. And that was freshman year, and that was the first I ever heard of it. And so I was kind of asking him, well, what the heck is that? Like, what does a venture capitalist do? And he just described it as you find these entrepreneurs who are starting businesses.
Do you want to tell us who his dad was?
He's not somebody who's a Silicon Valley name that folks would recognize.
Okay.
But he sort of described it to me, and it sounded like you give a little bit of money to these really special people with promising ideas, and then you fight like heck to help those ideas become realities and to help maximize the impact of those ideas. And so actually from freshman year in college, it was kind of in the back of my mind that was something that at some point, if I was qualified to do it, it would be really, really fun and potentially really meaningful to try to do.
You know, I find it fascinating because I don't know that I could speak for my entire generation of people in the technology world by any stretch, but I'm not sure that most people my sort of generation would have even known really what venture capitalists were, because, you know, what year did Don Valentine found Sequoia?
1972.
Yeah. So, and it was a very much a quiet cottage industry for a very long time. And so, you know, there just weren't very many venture capitalists, and it wasn't a very, particularly because of the demeanor of guys like Don. I don't know if you consider this to be a fair comment, but I consider Don to be the category designer of technology venture capital. Do you think that's fair?
That's probably fair.
Yeah.
I think VC today is a thing in and of itself, meaning the category to some extent has been defined. And so a lot of people try to plug themselves into that category definition. And one of the things that Don had to do in 1972, and one of the things that we actually think a lot about still today, forget for a second preconceived notions, forget how the category has been designed, forget what the expectations are of a venture capitalist. Think in terms of first principles. What is the problem that you're setting out to solve? And how can you deliver a unique and compelling solution to that problem? That's true for our business, just as it's true for the businesses in which we invest. And when Don first got going in 1972, the unique and compelling solution that he had was go-to-market experience. He was surrounded by a bunch of brilliant engineers who knew how to build really unique and compelling stuff, but didn't necessarily know how to take it to market. And so the venture capital business was just a nice mechanism to align incentives, but the real problem he was solving was maximizing the impact of those new technologies, not generating returns for investors.
He never thought of himself, you correct me if this is inaccurate, but my interpretation is he never thought of himself as being in some kind of a financial business. He always thought of himself as being in the business of helping entrepreneurs build their businesses, right?
Don will tell you that he is a terrible financier, a mediocre picker of companies, but a terrific builder of companies. Don was always clear that the thing that he could help out with was the building of the business.
Well, his track record stands alone, right?
He did all right. Cisco, Oracle, Apple, Electronic Arts, Atari, he did okay.
Yeah, not so bad. And actually, the one that you didn't mention in there is Sequoia itself, which you know, and we probably should have warned you. We will chase zebras down rabbit holes, and we will, and there might be dancing girls, and we may bounce around a little bit, but that's the conversation that we have. And so the one that you didn't mention is the creation of Sequoia itself as an institution. So maybe share with us a little bit your thoughts on Sequoia.
I think there were three things that Don, I think there were three things in particular that Don did that served as kind of foundational stories for Sequoia that we kind of tell over and over again as our organization expands to make sure that we don't lose sight of why we exist. The first was, even though from 1972 to 1977, Sequoia Capital was nothing more than Don Valentine, he didn't call it Valentine Ventures, he called it Sequoia Capital, because he was smart enough to know that a team was going to have a chance to endure and to be something that lasts long beyond his sort of phase as an investor. And so the first thing he did was he called it Sequoia Capital to try to build something that would endure. The second thing that Don did was, at some point, once he had a little bit of a track record, he kind of went through the list of folks who give us money to invest, so our limited partners, and he said, you know what, I only want to work for great causes. If an investment is a home run, I want the results of that investment. I want all the gains that have been generated to go to a cause that I can feel good about. So if you look at our limited partners today, the folks who give us the money, it's almost entirely foundations and universities. And so if an investment makes a whole bunch of money, yes, some of that comes to the partners at Sequoia, but the vast majority of that goes to funding medical research, to providing scholarships, to doing a whole host of things that we actually care about. In a lot of cases, we actually have a personal connection to. And for that reason, he imbued us with a sense of purpose that a lot of money-making organizations don't necessarily have. And then the third thing that Don did, which also kind of contributes to that sense of purpose.
Pat, if I could just interrupt you, there's an interesting thing in what you just said around foundations and endowments. I was just at Stanford recently. They invited me to speak at Stanford.
Can you believe that?
How did they make such a mistake?
Oh my God. Yeah, no, I don't think I'm invited back. But I digress. But the amazing thing about an institution like Stanford, if I understand it correctly, and maybe you can shine a light here, their endowment is such that they raise so much money from donations, particularly from alumni and other organizations, of course. And of course, the success they've had over time with their various range of investments, venture capital being one of the asset classes they invest in. But the combination of good stewardship of the money and raising a whole lot of money means that an institution like that can live independent of tuition, and therefore it can make decisions in a way that, you know, an institution that didn't have that flexibility wouldn't. Is that, do I understand that right? Or if I don't, tell me where that's not correct.
I think for an organization like Stanford, that's probably true. And the thing that we say a lot of times with portfolio companies is, don't think about profitability as a financial motive, think about profitability as freedom. I think if you're Stanford and you have a big enough endowment and you invest it wisely enough, you can afford to invest in seemingly crazy things that have a chance to deliver outsized impact to the world, right? So just like a profitable company has more freedom in terms of how they can operate, I think an organization like Stanford or the Ford Foundation or any one of our kind of 50 to 60 LPs, to the extent they're financially stable, they can just take more risk and try things that have a chance to have a bigger impact. So I think you're right.
And how does the fact that you folks, of course, know this is the role you play for Stanford and, of course, many, many others, you know, I've heard you guys talk in the past about how that is a cultural defining component, but could you shed some light on that?
Yeah, so generally speaking, I think purpose is most powerful when the going gets tough. And I mentioned how it kind of imbues us with a sense of purpose. How that shows up day to day, there are a lot of conversations that we end up having either amongst ourselves or with the companies that we're in business with that just aren't comfortable. Because a lot of times the right answer is not the easy answer. And a lot of times we want to push. And we want to push because we have a point of view on what we think is best for us as a partnership or for a company that we're in business with. And when you're in that uncomfortable situation, it really, really helps to think about the fact that you're not doing it for yourself. You're doing it on behalf of a whole bunch of causes that you actually care about. So I guess said differently, it actually does help me, because when I'm preparing myself to go into an uncomfortable conversation, I actually think about the fact that I'm doing it for a set of things that are far greater than myself or even our partnership.
Wow.
There's also a little bit, so like I went to Boston College, as I mentioned. I actually went there on a scholarship, which is the only reason that I was able to go there. And that scholarship was funded, obviously, by the Boston College Endowment, which is a limited partner in Sequoia Capital. And so the first investment that I was personally associated with here that ended up making some money, I went back and looked up how much of that fund was allocated to Boston College. And based on the gains from that investment, had I paid back the scholarship. And so there is kind of little personal connections that people have that really help to solidify those links.
I'd say that it also hones our focus on the investment decision-making side too. The fact that we're investing money on behalf of these great organizations puts a pressure on us to make sure that we're investing in things that are compelling causes for good, that create good in the world, that fit with the missions and the standards of the organizations that we're representing or we're investing their dollars into. And there are many investments where we sit around the table, not many, but there are several investments we've had in the time I've been here where we've sat around the table and said, this might be a great money-making opportunity, but this is not an opportunity that's in line with the principles of Sequoia and with the LPs that we have the opportunity to represent. And so we've passed on several of those and on all those types of situations. So it has helped kind of elevate our standard just generally, having the sacred ability to invest on behalf of these great causes.
And would it be safe to characterize you guys as sort of the third generation of Sequoia? Would that be fair?
That's a good question. So that was actually the third thing that I was going to mention that Don did a very good job of. Generational transition is always really hard in a venture partnership. It was at the end of the 90s that Don kind of took a look at himself and at the team that he had built. And he realized that with Doug Leone and Michael Moritz, he had the next generational leaders in the partnership ready to go. And so at the end of the 90s, Don literally called Michael and Doug into a room, and he actually gave him a piece of paper, and he said, here are all the things that I'm willing to do. Just put a check next to the ones that you want me to do. The partnership is yours. Your only responsibility is to leave it in better condition than you inherited it. And that was it. He didn't ask them to buy him out. He didn't ask for any ongoing economics. He literally just gave them the partnership. But when he did that, like the sense of responsibility that came along with it and the notion of stewardship, which you mentioned in relation to Stanford, we actually call our senior most partners the stewards of Sequoia because their job is to leave it in better position than they inherited it. And so the first, Don Valentine was the first, and then it was Michael and Doug Leone. And then about 5 years ago, Michael stepped back for health reasons, and it became Doug Leone with Jim Getz and our partner Neil in China. And Jim earlier this year stepped back to pass the torch to the next generation. So now Rulot Bota joins Doug and Neil as our senior most stewards of Sequoia. So we're kind of on the, I guess that'd be 1, 2, 3, 4th generation.
You guys would be 4, yeah. Fair enough. And so how does that feel? That you're at this storied firm, and you could argue that the subsequent generations have actually done at least as well or better. I guess you guys would know from a returns point of view, but the context in which the returns happen always matters. But however you want to look at it, it's no matter how you look at it, the firm has continued to prosper long past the day-to-day involvement of its founder. And so that's a successful succession, no matter how you want to look at it. And so as you guys, you're the young guns, right?
Indeed.
Yes.
So how does it feel in that context at this kind of a place that is it the seat of Silicon Valley? How does it feel to be the young guns?
I think it's a combination of it's incredibly humbling to work and be trusted by partners who have helped train and give us guidance and recruited us and helped us to learn this business over the years. It very much is a place where our partners take one another under each other's wings. Like for me, early on in my career, I got the opportunity to follow Jim and Doug to boards and learned how to be a board member and be an investor directly from them. And now that I'm on boards of my own, I find myself, having my own style and my own way of addressing problems, but learning from the things that they've given. So there's
Do you ever notice like Jim Getz coming out of your mouth sometimes in a meeting?
I mean, I could never like put myself at that level. That
we should be so lucky.
Yeah, I should be so lucky. But I'd say that many of the things that I do with the portfolio companies I work with come from things I learned with Jim. And Jim had a very special way, or has a very special way, that he partners and builds relationships of trust with founders. Is a very special way in which he looks at products and works very closely with engineering teams in his portfolio companies. And those are absolutely things that I try to emulate myself, learning from his success and the success of others. So I'd say like there's a humility you feel like, just that these great investors who have accomplished so much are trusting and working with you and teaching you that you're so thankful for and so appreciative of and want to make the most of. And then there's also this like, oh my gosh, I got to kill it every single day. Every single day is like my first day on the job, in that I have to figure out how I can move the needle, make a difference, be impactful, and help Sequoia to continue to be better today as a result of my efforts than it was yesterday before I came to work.
So you guys do have a sense that when you walk into work, like I'm walking into Yankee Stadium, or I don't know what other kind of analogy to use, but like it's not lost on you what's going on, right?
No, that's funny. There's light just went out here. Sorry about that. There's the back door that a lot of employees can come in through, and then there's the front door to Sequoia. I walk through the front door every day just to remind myself what a privilege it is to do so.
So maybe if we could roll the tape back a little bit, Matt, we were starting to talk about your backstory and building computers and stuff. And so let's tease some of that out. So you're this nerdy kid building computers. Tell us about
I was a nerdy kid growing up in Orange County. And I was, whenever I say Orange County, people automatically like picture the TV shows and movies about Orange County. I was like in the armpit of Orange County. In the back.
So you didn't grow up next to, I
don't think of me as a kid growing up on Laguna
90210 or whatever that was. I don't know their name, but yeah, that wasn't you.
My father worked as an engineer at Northrop Grumman, and my mom was a stay-at-home mom, and I had a passion for video games. I was 12 years old, loved video games. And my mom said to me, look, if you want to play video games, you better get your butt outside and start mowing lawns and earn money to go buy the parts and build your own computer. And I don't want you buying one, I want you building it. And so I bought a book, I learned how to do it. So
hold on, I hate to interrupt you, Matt, but you maybe shed a little light on your mom for us. Like, what is it about your mom that says, hey, like, it's like the 16-year-old who wants a car. Okay, well, you better learn how to build that car, son. Like, where did that come from with your mom?
I think part of it was in how she was raised, and that her parents went through the Depression, but she just had this push on me constantly. And no matter what I did, I could always be a little bit better. And she just pushed me and pushed me and pushed me in every aspect of my life. And I love her tremendously for it.
And did you love her every time for that? Or were there moments of frustration?
The tension was tremendous. We were like bombs going off all the time because she was constantly challenging my decisions or pushing me. I remember when I made the decision, I was a computer science student originally in college, and I made the decision to switch to finance because I wanted to do a little bit more aspects of the business. And my mother thought that was like the greatest mistake I was making in my life, and was, so disgusted with me. And even then, when I went and got a job at Goldman Sachs, which coming from BYU was kind of a unique thing at the time, she was like, I still wish you'd stay with computer science. She would challenge me constantly and push me, which was great, and I appreciated it. And so she was pushing me. She was like, look, you go build this computer, go figure out how to do it. My dad had built a computer a few years ago as a side project. And so I bought the book, learned how to do it, went with my dad to the local, at that time you could buy computer parts at like little swap meets around Orange and LA County. And
yeah, and you're reading Popular Mechanics, I'm guessing, and all that stuff.
I bought the parts, built my own, loved it. And then before long, I started hiring some of my buddies from church to come over on Saturdays, and we'd build these PCs and we'd sell them to people in our neighborhood, and we were able to make a nice margin before my team.
What year is this?
So it was a lot of fun. It was a great
what year, Matt?
Technology growing up.
Matt, what year were you a clone dealer?
This was in like 92, 93. So I had my own little clone dealership. So,
what was the brand called? What was the company called?
I just called it Miller Computing was the name I used at the time. But yeah, that was kind of my first entrepreneurial venture.
Well, I want to talk about the one that you thought of while you were at dinner, the restaurant media
Yeah,
net.
another harebrained idea I had. So I mean, literally, this is another story. This is years later. I was in college at BYU, and I literally was on a miserable blind date one night at PF Chang's. And if you're living in,
Hold on. You took a young lady to PF Chang's?
I did.
Okay, well, whatever happens next, you took her to PF Chang's. I'm just saying. Okay, keep going.
It sounds like PF Chang's is the creme de la creme. And so it's like I've been set up on this blind date, went to PF Chang's, and of course, everybody had the same idea. It was a long wait at the restaurant. And I thought to myself, man, they give you these crappy pagers, and why don't they show a wait list on the screen so you can see yourself moving up, because you're constantly going up and asking, where am I at? Am I still on there? When am I going to get seated? And so I thought you could show content on the screen that could be interesting and make the wait seem like it would go faster. And keep in mind, this is like in 2004. This is pre-iPhone, pre-iPad. Everybody had like a feature phone in their pockets. I thought this could be pretty interesting. We had something to make this experience better. And so I went home that night and was telling my roommate about it. And he was a designer and sketched up a markup of what it would look like. And I started writing the software behind that would operate it. And we went out a couple days later and we started selling it to the restaurant down the road from us. And like, hey, we'd be willing to put this up. And then we started saying, hey, maybe we should go to some of these local shops and see if they'd buy advertising on the system. So we signed up the art gallery and the movie theater and the local basketball team. And we sold $10,000 worth of ads on the system for one restaurant in Provo, in a couple months. And we were like, hey, this could be a business. And so we hired some more of our buddies and started going and did a business plan competition at school. And before long, we were running trials at Ruby Tuesday, Outback Steakhouse, Chili's,
Love it.
in Florida, in Tennessee, and in Texas. And had a lot of fun with it, but ultimately it didn't work out. We had kind of a chicken or egg problem in that it was still pretty expensive to put these systems out, and it was hard to get the national advertisers to really commit without doing a big test at scale. And so ultimately I ended up just going back to school and
so the category never took off.
What?
The category never took off.
The category never took off. And Steve Jobs, the brilliant one, came out with the iPhone years later that now captivated everybody's attention on their own, and there was no need for a restaurant media network. But
that's a great story.
Total failure, but man, I learned a lot from it. It was a great time. I took 2 years off school to do it, and it was one of the best experiences of my life.
What do you think your biggest lesson was?
I think I learned one, how far tenacity can take you, because we were just a bunch of kids with an idea, and it was amazing how far we could take that idea. And like, if you have something and you can believe it and you believe in it, you can really achieve anything. I mean, because our idea was now that I look at it, was fairly weak, and there's all sorts of reasons why that shouldn't work. But we were able to get pretty far with it because we had tenacity and we pushed it forward. I think the other thing that I learned, the hard lesson, was be in control of all the details relating to your business. I was a tech guy then, and I partnered with a guy who was a CFO who was over the financials of the company. And throughout that process, I found out he was taking advantage of us, and I didn't know it, and had to let him go. And part of the reason I wanted to change to finance was I always wanted to be in control of my own destiny, whether it was as an entrepreneur or as an employee in a bigger company or as a venture capitalist, and wanted to know the numbers and be able to build my own forecasts and understand all the nuances of finance and accounting. Because I'd been taken advantage of in that venture. And so always be in a position to be in control of all the details around your business.
That's awesome. And what about you, Pat? Let's unpack a little bit of your backstory.
Pat's is awesome.
I know. What can I tell you?
So you may not know this about Pat, but if you were in Gillette, Wyoming in the late 1990s and you happened to need a new roof on your house, Pat Grady was likely the guy putting the nails in, putting that roof on your house.
That's right.
That's awesome.
That's right.
When did you start roofing?
This is summers in high school. And then I think my first summer after freshman year in college. One of my buddies who was out of high school was just working as a roofer, and me and another guy wanted a summer job, and so we just were putting roofs on houses for 8 or 10 hours a day, which was which actually served as some motivation when I was in school, because sitting in an air-conditioned library studying is the easiest thing in the world next to being on a roof in 110-degree heat, putting down one shingle after the next and hoping you don't fall off. And so it was pretty good motivation when I did get to school.
So all of a sudden, the distinction between the two, school and not school, started to get very clear for you. Is that what was going on?
School looked pretty darn good by comparison, yeah. Yeah.
And so what happens after school for you?
So summer went from roofing, and then I had an internship on Wall Street, and came out of that.
Wait a minute. And then I had an internship, like,
Roofing to Wall Street?
as you do, you know.
Well, this is by the time I was after my junior year of college, and so that was the only internship I had in school. I think today people start with internships in like high school. I see resumes where somebody coming out of undergrad has already interned at Google, Facebook, 6 other companies, right? So that was after junior year of college. I did an investment banking internship and learned a bunch of interesting stuff, and then came back to school senior year. And at that point, knew I wanted to do something business related, but still wasn't sure what. And that notion of venture capital was still kind of kicking around in the back of my head. And I just assumed I'd have to do it after many, many years of experience. But there was a place in Boston called Summit Partners, which is still a great investment firm. And they did a little bit of venture capital, a little bit of private equity. And their story for founders was, we're going to invest in your company and then we'll help you make it a better company. And that resonated with me because that was exactly the sort of thing that had intrigued me about venture capital to begin with, was the notion of working with founders to help them build bigger and better businesses. So right out of college, I went to Summit in Boston and worked there for a couple of years, and really enjoyed all the people. Like, got to tear apart a bunch of different business models, meet a bunch of different management teams and founders, and start to get a sense for the sort of variety that exists in the world. And the piece of it that was most interesting to me was kind of the younger companies that had really audacious goals and were willing to break a bunch of stuff in the process because the reward, if it actually worked, was going to be huge. And I started noticing that the place where those companies existed disproportionately was Silicon Valley, and the sort of organizations that were seemingly the best at really helping their ideas come to fruition were like Sequoia Capital. And fortuitously, in my 3rd year at Summit, I got a chance to interview with Sequoia, and very coincidentally.
And hold on, this is sort of like, oh yes, I went from roofer to like ta-da. So, how does one just sort of find themselves interviewing at Sequoia Capital? Were you hitchhiking, or like how did that happen?
So the
Mike Moritz's laundry, something.
The fortuitous coincidence was Sequoia had just decided to amplify the focus on growth stage investing. So we've done, early stage investing, think startups, for 45 years. We've been in the growth stage investing business, think scale ups, for actually about 30 years, but only for the last 10 years or so has that been a sort of full business line at Sequoia. And so this was about 10 years ago. I was one of the first people to join for that business line. And Summit was actually the sort of place that Sequoia was actively recruiting from. And when I went to Summit, I looked around and saw these people from Harvard and Ivy League schools, and was kind of terrified, and basically just worked as hard as I possibly could for a few years. And as a result, had a good reputation at Summit. So when Sequoia was snooping around for Summit people, they kind of triangulated in on me as the guy who was willing to work his tail off, and that sort of fit with the Sequoia culture. And that was how I got the first interview. And actually, I'll tell you how I got the job, which is kind of funny. So I ended up interviewing with everybody, and there were varying levels of skepticism that were pretty apparent going through those interviews. But my very first interview was with Doug Leone, who at the time was responsible for the growth business, and today is responsible for all of Sequoia.
And he's very gentle, isn't he? Isn't that the word most people use for Doug?
And that I absolutely love. So it's a joke, right? Anybody who's listening who doesn't know Doug is the most direct human being you've ever met. His interview, people have described it as 10 minutes in, I felt like I was sitting there naked. So that's
My experience of Doug is it's like a conversation with Mike Tyson.
that's a good way to put it.
Right?
But,
He's like, he is right there. Doug Leone is in the conversation and you're having it with him.
and I absolutely love that, because growing up in Wyoming, I was always restless. I always felt like there was something more out there that I needed to go get. So I was always restless. I was always impatient. And as a result, all my friends in high school, all my friends in college, all my friends out of college thought of me as incredibly aggressive. And so when I was sitting with Doug, I was enjoying the interview, but then I think where I really kind of got him is he said, "What one word would your friends use to describe you?" And I said, "aggressive." And that's like the magic word for Doug, because he loves people who are kind of super hard charging. And I think Doug basically overcame all the other skepticism from other folks and kind of found a spot for me at Sequoia.
So there's an interesting thread here, and I'm sure you guys must be aware of it, which is neither one of you has, what you might consider a traditional background, right? Fair?
I say that's fair.
Would it be even fair to say, like, maybe a little bit felt like on the island of misfit toys from time to time?
Oh, I'd go so far as to say that when I joined Sequoia, I had no marketable skills whatsoever.
I'd say that's an accurate description, and I think that's a big part of the philosophy here to a certain extent, and that we do have people who have spectacular backgrounds and spectacular experiences, but occasionally our partners have taken chances on people who don't have that background, recognizing that chip on their shoulder with good fundamentals is enough to drive somebody forward to do incredible things. And we even see that when we look at meet with entrepreneurs. We meet with people that come from all sorts of non-traditional backgrounds or have done non-traditional things, but they come with very strong core principles as people, and they have a reason why they're very educated or informed or have a unique perspective about a certain problem or opportunity, and they have a chip on their shoulder that they've got to figure out a way to make it. They come from Wyoming wondering what else is out there in the world, or they come from having completely failed at a startup when they were in college and wanted to make it in this world. And they have different experiences across our whole partnership that are people who have had different things that fuel them and give them that drive and that energy.
So Matt's actually hit on a pretty core point here. Like, this is, if you look at Sequoia, something that is objectively unique about us is we've managed to be relevant for 45 years. And there just aren't a lot of venture capital firms who've withstood the test of time. And the question as to, well, why is that? Like, what was Sequoia's secret? The secret is nothing more than kind of going back to the story about Don. Like, Don realized that a team is more durable than an individual or even a federation of individuals. And so when we think about building a high performance team, we want it to be as functionally diverse as humanly possible. We want as diverse a set of perspectives as humanly possible. We want some people who are coming in with a huge amount of experience that is of particular use, whether it's Bill Korn, who ran engineering at Google, or Carl Eschenbach, who built the go-to-market from 0 to 5 billion at VMware, or Mike Vernal, who ran the platform team and a bunch of other parts of product and engineering at Facebook, or Alfred Lin, who was the COO and president and chairman of Zappos, like CFO Zappos. We hire people who have wonderful, wonderful experience that they can contribute, but then we also hire people like Matt and I who don't have much of a background, but are kind of sponges who can apprentice with other folks and kind of grow up in the image of Sequoia. And when you mix all that stuff together, and then you're really, really deliberate about making sure that not only is the team as a whole performing, but each individual is really doing their part, it ends up working out really well. So that's been actually functioning as a team has kind of been the secret to Sequoia's success. And that's why 24-year-olds with no particular background, which is what I was when I joined, sometimes get a chance here.
You were 24, Pat.
I was 24.
And how old are you now, if it's okay to ask?
I'm now 34.
So you're a 10-year veteran. And Matt?
A 5-year veteran.
5-year veteran. And how old are you?
I'm 37.
Yeah.
So I joined when I was 32.
How
31 actually when I joined.
31.
31.
Yeah, Sequoia partner at 31.
Pat, I want to ask you a little bit about something that Frank Slootman taught you around
Oh yeah.
being comfortable, getting comfortable, being uncomfortable. And I want to unpack that a little bit. How do you get to the point?
Are you making fun of me? Is that?
How do you get to the point where you do feel comfortable being uncomfortable?
That is a good question. Well, first, let me explain a little bit behind that line and why we think that's such a good line. We actually say that around here all the time. One of the overarching trends that's kind of caused by technology is accelerating change, right? Technology often acts as the agent of change for an industry or for a business. And as the means of producing new technology have been democratized and kind of reach every corner of the world, and as the cost of building something with technology goes down further and further and further, there's been this explosion of innovation that's running into every geography and every industry, which is why we see the moment in the sun for particular companies getting shorter and shorter and shorter. It's why there's more and more turnover in some of the big indexes, or the Dow Jones Industrial Average, or whatever the case might be. Companies are rising and falling faster than they ever have before. And so the notion of getting comfortable with being uncomfortable is the notion that the only thing you can really count on is that tomorrow is going to be different than today. And either tomorrow is going to smack you upside the head and you're going to die, or you're going to take advantage of it and somehow build something even stronger and even better than what exists today. That's the idea behind getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. For me personally, that was actually extremely hard, and that was one of the hardest things about joining Sequoia, is that things like math for me are very comfortable because it's very structured and very rigid, and there's kind of a finite body of knowledge that you can master in a linear sort of way. That's not at all.
Me too, Pat. I'm really big on math.
Yeah, I can tell.
Yeah, I'm right there. Fractions. I'm with you on fractions. Long division. I got you.
Excellent. But for me, that was always really comfortable. And then I got to Sequoia, and nothing is constant from one day to the next. Nothing is structured. Nothing is linear. Everything is always changing. And so in my first few years here, I didn't know it at the time. I only knew it in retrospect. But I was at one point on the verge of getting fired. And fortunately, one of our partners said, "No way, over my dead body. We got to keep this guy." But the reason was because I was a kind of structured thinker in a completely unstructured environment, and I couldn't adapt. And part of what got me comfortable with that was mentorship from some of our partners, like Jim Getz in particular, who I remember used to pull me aside and give me pep talks. And one of his pep talks was effectively like, look, you have to give up on the notion of being perfect, and you have to give up on the notion of pleasing everybody. Just do what you think is the right thing to do. And if it works out, great. If it doesn't, try something different next time. And I know that kind of sounds like a simple or trivial thing, but for me, that notion of like, give up on the idea of being perfect, make the best decision you can, act on it, and move on. Reassess, make another decision, act on it, move on. Like, for me, that was kind of all it took to get comfortable with it. But I think for a lot of people like myself, it's really, really unnatural to actually be comfortable with constantly changing, constantly having your assumptions being challenged, constantly having to throw away the stuff that worked yesterday and figure out what's going to work tomorrow. Like, that's not a natural thing for most people, I think.
Well, you need to support your entrepreneurs or your founders in that as well, right?
Absolutely. Well, that's, one of the things people talk about pattern matching, and I actually think that's a pretty poisonous term. I think pattern matching, a lot of times, people talk about it in relation to VCs, and they say, the VC can pattern match, and that's what helps them identify opportunities or be useful to founders. And to me, that's really dangerous because implicit is the assumption that yesterday is the same, or that tomorrow is the same as yesterday. Otherwise, the pattern wouldn't apply. And I think we have to be very, very careful about keeping in mind, even though we have this unbelievable corpus of tribal wisdom that's been accumulated over 45 years in the US and India and China across 1,000+ portfolio companies, some of which were wildly successful and some of which were total failures. Like, even though we have the benefit of all of that incredible context, at the end of the day, that does nothing more than inform the decision that an individual founder, individual CEO can make on her own. right? That's context, but they're going to have to make their own decision because their business is uniquely theirs. And it doesn't matter how many patterns we've seen, they might be the one to break the pattern. And God forbid we screw that up by trying to impose our stupid patterns onto their business.
Is it one of my favorite examples? You tell me what yours are. Isn't Airbnb in there?
How so?
Well, it seems like a completely mental idea for a lot. And
Yeah.
I mean, I would have thought it was crazy.
And we were seed investors in Airbnb.
I understand.
So it was, I mean, at that time it was air, bed, and breakfast, right? Spelled out long form. It was a very, very raw business, and it was one of those situations where the founders were just very clear on the way they thought the world was heading, and they were passionate enough about it, and it seemed like a big enough idea that it was worth taking the risk. And thank goodness we did, because it's become a huge success.
You know, and to Pat's point earlier, pattern matching is a poisonous term, but one of the benefits of being able to see so many great companies and great founders is you do get a sense of how rare it is to find somebody truly incredibly special. And there's certain characteristics of that person typically in how they think about the world, the passion they have, the way that they carry themselves. Sometimes it's brought out in different ways, but that team is one that, even though the idea at the time may have seemed outside of what you would expect, or it was hard to potentially catch the vision of every home being a potential hotel room, or so to speak, or a room that you could stay, or an experience you could have. The specialness of Brian and that team was tremendous, and that was easy to get excited about and invest behind. And that's
so what's maybe that checklist in your head if you're saying you're looking for that special person? You're ruling people in and ruling people out. Okay, so authenticity.
Authenticity is number one, and you could almost stop there. The reason I say that.
And what do you mean by authenticity?
Authenticity meaning they actually care about the problem they're trying to solve.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people who say, I'm going to make a list of business ideas, and then I'm going to pick one that seems good, and then I'm going to go after it. And sometimes that works, and that's fine. But I think the best businesses, for the most part, were people who experienced the problem, hated the problem, didn't understand why the problem hadn't been solved before, and just made it a mission to go out and change it. And because they care desperately about it, they're able to hire good people because that passion gets conveyed and people get inspired by it more so than they do by just saying that, the company's growing 100% year over year. Well, that's wonderful. Why is it growing? Like, why is this important? There are a lot of companies that are growing, but like, why is this a problem that the world needs to solve? That's the sort of thing that I think is first.
Like you guys just posted your podcast that you did with Eric Wan, the founder and CEO of Zoom.
Yeah.
It's the perfect example of authenticity. Here is one of the most brilliant engineers in video and video communications, who is tremendously humble, tremendously driven, sees this huge problem that there's this great opportunity to communicate differently and better than we ever have before, and is frustrated that the existing solutions have not invested to get there to build the right products and infrastructure, and forges out to go and do it himself, and does it also with a little bit of a personal mission in the opportunity to leverage some of the resources in his home country, China, to do something good for some of the engineers back in his home country in China, and just brings a tremendous amount of authenticity.
The examples go on and on, right? Like Adit Tatarko was founded House because she was trying to redesign her own house, and there was no good way to discover ideas for it, right? Brian Chesky started Airbnb because he actually needed money to pay rent, and renting out his couch was a clever way to do it, right? Fred Luddy started ServiceNow because he'd been the CTO at the incumbent, which at the time was Peregrine and Remedy, and he knew that the product could be better. He was planning to retire, but he kind of got restless and just happened to develop on a flight from the West Coast to London a working version of a product that was better than the existing incumbent, right?
And the other thing I love about Luddy, he was smart enough to understand that the shift from client server to the cloud was so meaningful that the likelihood that the incumbent companies would figure out that was very little, because the addiction to the as-is category is so strong. it's hard to see how big of a shift that is, right? And so it was genius because the category was going to move to the cloud, and he just got there and made it. And then pulled the future. He pulled the future forward, so to speak. Like somebody was going to go do that, and he became that somebody. It was genius.
Well, and to the point on authenticity too, he didn't. It's not as if he drawn out this big landscape and said, "Aha, everything that is on-prem will go to cloud." For him, it was first principles. For him, it was, man, I've been working in these enterprises for 30, 40 years. I don't understand why the experience that I have there isn't like the experience that I have on Amazon. Like, why can't we take that sort of simplicity into a business? He didn't even really know that it was a business opportunity when he built the software. He just wanted to see if he could do it. When he first started selling it, he was literally going door to door in San Diego. The first big customer he got, the company at the time was him and his brother Rob. They were at a trade show. All they had was their laptop to show a demo of the product, and a lady came up to him because they felt sorry for him. It turned out she was the CIO of TIAA Cref. They ended up becoming a $2 million annual customer. This is when it was just Fred and his brother, and they had no idea if anybody was going to buy the product.
That's awesome. I never heard that story before. That's fantastic. So maybe if we switch gears, could we take a little bit of a peek into your life outside of Sequoia, guys?
Sure.
So what's your life like outside of Sequoia, Matt?
Well, it's busy. I have 2 young kids. I have a 3.5-year-old a boy who loves airplanes and dinosaurs and wants to wrestle with dad. And
hey, Chris loves dinosaurs.
This morning,
I love airplanes. I love dinosaurs. I love wrestling. Keep going.
I mean, this morning he came in. I had just gotten back from the gym, and he came in and said, "Dad, I want to watch Deadly Animals." Deadly Animals fighting on the TV. So he's on just a great young kid. And then I have a baby girl who is 10 months old, who is just the sweetest. Actually, she's coming close to 11 months old now. Who's just the sweetest thing. She's super cute, a lot of fun. And then, of course, we have a wonderful wife who actually does all the work of keeping us all in line and help keeping us together as a family. But it is a busy full-time operation with the 2 young kids. Right. So I don't have like this wonderful social life outside of work. I'm home with my kids and having the time of my life.
And what about you, Pat?
Well, anybody who's met my wife knows that I married way out of my league. There's a concept in economics called Pareto superiority, which is when one option is objectively better than another option across every dimension. And that probably defines my wife. So I'm pretty lucky in that regard. Outside of work, I don't know, bike rides, mountain bike, road bike, skiing, snowboarding, play a little bit of tennis, do some CrossFit, go for runs, try to get outdoors as much as possible.
I hope you got some good skiing in this year.
Unfortunately, this is a low point for skiing. We didn't get that many weekends on the mountain. We had one long weekend in Jackson Hole, but we made the most of it.
Well, Jackson make up for a lot of weekends in Tahoe.
Yeah.
And so how do you juggle your life outside Sequoia with what I would imagine is a life inside Sequoia that could easily get to 100 hours a week if you let it?
Well, it's probably easier for me than that because my wife is at Greylock, and so she sort of appreciates what it's like.
Wait, back up there, handsome. You're married to a venture capitalist at Greylock?
I did, indeed, Sarah Goa.
That's awesome.
So it's like a royal wedding. When they got married, it was like a royal wedding in between the 2 firms because on her side of the aisle was her family and the Greylock partnership, and on Pat's side of the aisle was his family and the Sequoia partnership. And it was literally like the 2 royal houses watching their heirs ascend to be married one to another.
Or maybe like a Godfather-y like movie
was.
with like the 2 Dons coming in.
They even had a drone filming from above. It was amazing. It was incredible.
Thank you.
That's outstanding. Do you invest in similar areas and therefore compete on deals?
We do invest in similar areas. We don't invest in similar stages. So for the most part, she does seeds and Series A's, and for the most part, I do growth stage investments.
So does that mean that you can follow on invest in her companies?
Occasionally, yes.
Well, I can only imagine the conversation at home, Pat.
Well, it's funny. We stay completely away from work stuff for the most part because the last thing we want is any like unintentional conflicts of interest or anything that we shouldn't say to slip out. And so,
So you don't come home from work and say, "Oh, honey, let me tell you about the huge increase in my valuation today."
yeah, no, we try to stay away from that.
Oh, come on, that was funny. That was just in time VC humor. I just made that shit up right there.
Well done. Well done.
Well, that's very cool. And how long have you guys been together?
Together 7 years, married for 2 years.
Wow, superpower couple. Very cool. And so let's talk maybe a little bit more business. One of the things I found interesting, I think, Pat, it was you who mentioned that, because you guys only do about a deal a year, it tends to be very focusing. And so, is that still the case that for either one of you in a typical year, you would do one new investment?
Yeah, there are only so many companies that really end up making an outsized impact. And if we invest, there are a lot of situations where you can invest $1 and get back $3, right? Or invest $1 and get back $10. There are a lot of those situations that come along, but if we end up getting spread too thin and too diluted across too many different companies, then we have a hard time really focusing on the one or two or three that are really, really, really going to matter. And the way we solve for that is to try to only invest in the one or two or three that are really, really, really going to matter. And so when we do invest in a company, it's an indication that we think a company has a chance to be worth many billions of dollars, not just a few $100 million acquisition or that sort of thing. And so it is true that when we make an investment decision, we kind of try to ask ourselves, like, if this is the only company that I get to invest in for the next couple of years, am I still excited? And if you're honest with yourself, those opportunities only come up every so often. And, if Matt were to come into work one day this year, and in that one day, he found one of those opportunities, that'd be a pretty darn good year, assuming, of course, that he spent all the other days helping out portfolio companies.
But make no mistake, the job feels very much like you're exercising as fast as you can on a stationary bike, because you're meeting and you're trying to understand all of these opportunities and markets and trying to figure out which is the opportunity that you want to push forward and move forward with. And all of a sudden you meet that person or that opportunity that has those characteristics we talked about earlier. And then all of a sudden it's like that stationary bike comes off of its rack and you're running as fast as you can to lock that opportunity in, to become that person's partner. Hopefully you've been building a relationship with them over multiple years and getting to know them or getting to know that company. Sometimes you haven't had that opportunity, but when it's game time and you got to be flying. And so it's very much the stationary bicycle pedaling all year. And then when that opportunity comes, you go.
How many new companies are you reviewing each week or each month, personally?
Generally speaking, I think in rough numbers, each of us probably meets about 500 companies a year.
That's about right.
And so the funnel, so to speak, is probably about 500 to 1. And those 500 are amongst thousands of others that we'll hear about or get an email on or whatever. That's probably about right.
Yeah.
Wow. I just want to go back a second, Pat, to something you said. It reminded me a little bit of we had General Stanley McChrystal on the show.
Yeah.
And he said that the question he liked to ask was, if you had to stay here until this was done, what would you do differently? And it kind of reminds me of your comment of if you had to do this one investment and be very happy about it for a very long period of time, like this was the last investment or the last investment you're going to do for many years, are you going to be that happy? I don't know why that's correlated in my head, but it's like you got to be committed to see this thing through the end. How are you going to behave?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good test.
Yeah.
That's one of the nice things about having a pretty small partnership. And anytime we bring somebody into the partnership at Sequoia, whether it's the 24-year-old or somebody who's much more experienced, the hope is that they'll be a part of Sequoia for the rest of their careers. And so when you have a very long-term focus inside the partnership, it helps to translate to a very long-term focus with investments. And so for us, it's not a hypothetical of like, what if you're going to be here until the end? That's actually what we're hoping is going to happen, is that we'll be with these companies for 5 or 10 or sometimes 15 years, right?
Yeah. And so if I want to be one of the 500, if I'm an entrepreneur and I want to be one of the 500 that gets a trip to the plate, what do I need to do to get to be one of the 500 that gets to see one of the two of you or your colleagues?
So I know there's a lot of conventional wisdom out there that says find a warm introduction, and that's all fine. But the truth matter is some people send great cold call emails and some people send terrible cold call emails. And if you send a great cold call email, you will get a response and you will probably get a meeting. And it's kind of as simple as that.
Yep.
If you send a terrible cold call email, we'll probably also respond, but you're probably not going to get a meeting.
What are some components of a of a good cold call email here?
No, I mean, I think it's as easy as being short and succinct, and why you think that it's a relevant opportunity, and why you think why you think Sequoia would be interested. You know, just a short summary. I think, to be completely frank, like most of the cold call emails that VCs receive tend to be a little out there, or they'll be very, very long with, you know, multiple paragraphs you got to read through to figure out why you think it's interesting. You're processing a lot of emails every day with your existing investments as well as new ones, but short and succinct to the point.
And also something personal, right? Like it could say, Matt Miller, I see that you're on the board of Carbon Black. I really admire what they've done in endpoint security. However, I believe they're missing a key opportunity, which is going to be the next generation of security. In one line, here's what it is. I'd love to tell you about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And if that one line has decent stuff in it, Matt's going to meet with you.
Absolutely.
Demonstration of some homework done.
Yeah.
Yeah, you do get to a point in life where you say, okay, if you're going to have a communication with me, and I know this may sound arrogant, but I'm going to say it anyway, like put it in some context, like, right?
Yeah.
You got to understand who you're communicating with here. Like, put it in context.
We get blasts sometimes from people who are trying to raise money where they'll put on the to line all of the partners at Sequoia, several of the partners at Excel, several of the partners at and they'll have a couple paragraphs describing what they're doing, and it'll take you a while to figure out and read between the lines. But to Pat's point, if you're personal and succinct,
all in
we love to meet with you. That's our job, is to meet with you. We want to meet with great entrepreneurs. So just make it to the point.
So if that's how I get to be one of the 500, how do I get to be the one?
Well, we mentioned authenticity as a key characteristic of founders. I think a lot of times the way that manifests itself is the clarity with which they articulate the vision for the company. And that's actually, that's a pretty impactful thing, to be able to explain really, really clearly why what you're doing is important, why you're uniquely suited to do it, why now is the right time for this category to emerge, and why you're going to be the company that defines and dominates the category. If somebody can do that to us in a crisp and compelling way, chances are they can do that to the potential customers, and chances are they can do that to the potential employees. And if it inspires us, it's probably going to inspire those folks too. And so that's a pretty good leading indicator for future success in a business. And so in some ways it makes our job easy. If somebody says something and it really resonates, that's probably a pretty good idea. If somebody says something and it really doesn't, and we have to try really hard to understand, like, what's the real idea here, and like where's the real value that you're providing, then other people are going to have that same struggle, and it's probably going to be a lot harder for them to build a big business.
So if I understand you correctly, communication is what really matters most.
Hugely important.
Yeah, it's super important.
Being able to deliver on what you communicate matters even more, but if you can't communicate it, you can. And this almost goes back to the founding premise of Sequoia, right? Like, Don was surrounded by brilliant engineers who didn't really know how to articulate the importance of what they were doing in a way that a customer could appreciate, right? Like, that's hugely important. That's that last mile problem. You got to connect it to a bunch of human beings who actually care, or the magic box is just going to sit there in a closet.
Brilliant.
Now, you mentioned category a couple times there, so I would be remiss. I would be, I would be remiss not to ask the young guns how they think about how you guys both think about categories in relation to the companies you want to invest in and help.
No, I mean, I think we share a very similar philosophy to your own work and writings, in that the companies that create and own categories are the companies that define the message upon which they are compared, and define to which other companies will come and compare to them. And they're the companies that create the largest amount of market value. And if you can find a way to pass point of communication, if you can find a way to articulate your message and create the way people perceive your market opportunity and the way people benchmark your own performance and your own ability to serve their needs, that gives you tremendous power to build a very large company. And many of the great companies in our portfolio have been examples of those that started out as really good ideas, but built those and morphed those into very big, nuanced categories.
I'll give you an example. I know that you have an abundance of examples, but if you look at HubSpot,
I always want more examples.
if you look at HubSpot as an example, HubSpot today, I don't know, has 2.5 billion or so market cap. It's become a somewhat iconic company in the marketing community. It's become an iconic company in Boston. They've become an extraordinary success, and we were lucky enough to partner with those guys 6 years ago or so. At which point, and the founders Brian and Dharmesh would tell you this themselves, at which point the product itself was actually pretty mediocre, and the unit economics themselves were actually pretty mediocre. But the thing that really inspired us to partner with them was Brian and Dharmesh could articulate why marketing was changing, why that problem was inevitable and impactful, and it was going to turn everything upside down, and why the solution, importantly, was inbound marketing, which was the category that they created and the platform that they had built. They could articulate that better than anybody else out there. And if you were to look at the landscape at the time, which is something we always do when we make an investment, there were literally 100 companies that competed with different parts of what HubSpot was doing, a lot of which had better products. And it was the strength of that vision that allowed them to create a community around them, some of whom were their employees, some of whom were their customers, but then most of whom were actually not customers. They were just people who are consuming HubSpot content and using it to educate themselves on how marketing should be done. That community grew up around them and was kind of a leading indicator for all of the goodness to follow. And then as they got some more scale, and as they got a better engineering organization, a better product team, they built a better product. And there's kind of this virtuous cycle that came as they went, but it was all led by their ability to articulate the category and then to stick themselves inside that category as the leader.
Brilliant.
They're absolutely textbook. And the thing that's amazing about this, and it blows my mind, and most people even to this day still disagree with me. What you just shared, Pat, is the story about your company and or technology sets the value for your company and technology. And in a crazy way, it's more important. And I'm not saying you cannot have a legendary technology. I think today, more than, in the old days in the enterprise world, you could get away with having a product that was unimplementable and or usable. Today, that day, I think, is long over. And so I think you have to have a great product. And the greater the product, the greater advantage you're going to have. There's no question in my mind about that. However, it's so amazing to hear this story over and over and over again. And that what I love about it is that category designers do the same things over and over and over again, but they just are doing it intuitively.
Yeah.
And so how did these guys know that they had to design this category and set the agenda and all the things you just described?
Well, for Brian and Dharmesh in particular, this is another situation where they had experienced the problem themselves. And so Brian was actually working with he had some sales background, and he was working with a couple of local investors with their portfolio companies to try to just tighten up their sales and marketing process. And he realized that most of them kind of had a demand generation problem. They were just having a tough time filling the funnel. And meanwhile, Brian was buddies with Dharmesh. Dharmesh was just writing this blog for the fun of it that had 40 or 50,000 weekly visitors. And so Brian kind of looked at what Dharmesh was doing, and Dharmesh kind of looked at what Brian was doing. And they said, well, geez, it sort of feels like the old school methods of beating people to death with cold calls is not really as effective as actually producing interesting content that they want to consume. So maybe we can help businesses do that. And instead of beating down the door to get customers, you just create a gigantic magnet and customers come to you. And so that was kind of the founding premise. And they didn't consciously think about it as, aha, we're going to design a category. They just thought about it as like, we've discovered this thing that we suspect to be true, that other people don't really appreciate yet. So we're just going to try to educate the world on it and then build a product that they can use to do it themselves. And if all that stuff works, someday hopefully it'll be a good business. And all that stuff worked. And so they worked.
And that's just natural, intuitive category design. There's some people that for some reason, they just know that the conversation you want to have with the world is not a typical product, feature, better, faster, cheaper conversation. It's a conversation that goes exactly like you described. Hey, world, today it goes like this. That actually kind of sucks when you think about it. This aggression will not stand, man. And check this out, right? And when that narrative knits together well, to your point, with an impassioned founder or founders who can deliver that message and then execute, as HubSpot did, an incredible set of products and technologies. As we say in Play Bigger, they prosecute the magic triangle, right? Product, company, and category. Pow.
Yeah.
And is there, if I were to say to you, okay, so how do I be that entrepreneur, guys? Like, I want to be that entrepreneur. How do I be that entrepreneur?
It's a really good question.
You know, I think like it's hard to give you like, oh, here's the natural next step she would take. But I think it's that authenticity, be who you are, combined with have a unique perspective about the problem you're solving that drives you in that direction towards natural category creation. Like being as deep as they were with their customers in marketing, or I think of like an example that I work more closely with is one of the companies called Docker, which has done a really good job creating a category and building a community.
Unbelievable. Mobilizing a movement, creating a religion. I don't know, whatever, however you want to, incredible.
And it's not like Solomon Hykes, who's the founder of Docker, said, had studied in category creation and plotted out his way as to how he was going.
He's been trading with us for 5 years in the background. He just didn't want to tell you.
But he was an authentic software developer who loved finding ways to build and develop software more efficiently. And he actually had a business called .cloud where he was running a platform as a service that was struggling to work. But because he was a passionate developer, he had figured out unique ways to deliver his platform as a service, one of which was the Docker container, making it easier to create a standard for the building and shipping and deploying of software applications. And he open sourced that and he shared that with the world because he was passionate as the company was kind of getting ready to be sold or acquired for a very small amount. And when that took off and people started to resonate and recognize that that was good software, he and the team at Docker capitalized on it by supporting their enthusiasts. And so they immediately started by saying, you know what, let's have meetups and let's get together. And pretty soon they were having over 200 meetups around the globe where they were sending people back and forth with pennies in their pockets before they had raised their next round to go and support these meetups and support their users and their enthusiasts and the people who were.
And is it true for a time, Matt, that the vast majority of their revenue came from T-shirt sales at their events?
Absolutely. Absolutely. T-shirt sales and conferences.
Right? They had the best. For people who don't know, this is a crazy ass story. The enthusiasm around this technology, this container category that Docker created and what it meant to developers was such that when people go to the show, they buy T-shirts like they're buying like rock band t-shirts and
Absolutely.
shit, right? I'm not exaggerating, right? Is that fair?
Because, and I think, like, for those that are less familiar, what Docker did was they created a technology that enabled a whole new way of building and constructing software, made it much, much easier. This process called, or this methodology called microservices. And they were an enabler of that because they made it so much easier for people to abstract the pieces of code and have a standard format in which the applications or smaller pieces of applications were wrapped. And the net result of it was it made developers' lives significantly easier, and it allowed developers and companies to have this standard through which they could develop software much more quickly than ever before at far lower costs. And so it kicked off this whole revolution around microservices, and Docker rushed in and supported that community and supported that revolution to own that. And they created these conferences and they put out these t-shirts even before they had their full set of enterprise products ready.
Right.
But they are the owners of this category around microservices, and they're the owners of this category around containers. And that puts them in a very advantaged position, and they have been able to build enterprise products behind that and sell into these customers now with a tremendous amount of leverage and respect coming in the door because they own the community around it, and people know that they are the experts in this, and bring them in as experts from day one rather than some new vendor trying to sell me some new solution that I'm not familiar with.
And one of the interesting things about these folks, and I think they're emblematic of the new model enterprise technology company. In the old days, the norm was the enterprise vendor was at war with the customer all the time.
Yes.
The customer was pissed off about the technology. The customer was pissed off about paying too much in maintenance. There were lawsuits. Like there was, in the world that I grew up in, there was a lot of like very, very antagonistic relationship between vendor and customer in the enterprise business.
And I think part of the change, by the way, has been that the kingmakers in the enterprise today are developers, especially on the infrastructure side. Developers are the people who are voting with their feet and helping to define the architectures. And so that has lent itself to the next generation of enterprise infrastructure companies wanting to be partners with the developers and wanting to make the developers successful at their jobs. Yeah. Because if I'm Docker or I'm Confluent or I'm Mongo, and I can help a developer be successful in their work and be their partner and make them look like a total all-star to their boss, then I know that I'm going to be able to be built into their next generation architecture, the next set of applications that they're building.
And so to think we're in a world today. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Matt. I'm sorry.
No, I said that partnership with developers is very key for these businesses.
Yeah, and so to think we're in an era now in the technology business where these companies are not at war with their customer base; they're actually in love with them. And you guys mentioned earlier, we were so. This may sound like a corny word, but I'm going to use it anyway. We were blessed to have Eric you on with us because, right, Colin, like he's
an incredible guy.
He spends the whole show talking about happiness.
And he's switching his backgrounds the whole time we're talking. He's just randomly switching backgrounds.
He's subversively funny as shit. I mean, hysterical.
Taking you around the world.
Oh, he's got such a sense of humor. It's great. But he keeps coming back to, well, if we make the developers happy, they're going to write good software. And if the salespeople are happy, they're going to be good with the customers. And if the marketing people are happy, and et cetera, right? And that's all he wants to talk about. And after we got off the dialogue with him, I thought to myself, if that was a conversation we just had with the guy who is the category king of the 15 employee lawn mowing business in my neighborhood in Santa Cruz, that would have been an awesome Legends and Losers, because that guy was awesome, right? And you would sort of think a guy with this, I don't know, maybe a little left coasty, a little kumbaya-y, I don't know how you want to describe it, philosophy, right? you'd go, well, that guy's great. He's awesome. He runs an awesome lawn mowing business, and that's awesome for him. And that was a great show, right? But the guy is running one of the fastest growing technology companies in Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's some causation there.
It's mental.
He, that when we started getting to know Eric over the last couple of years, we were also talking with customers and using the product ourselves and just trying to understand what makes the company special. And one of the things couple of things that customers rave about, one of them is they ask for something in the product and 2-3 weeks later it's in the product. Meaning their ability to actually listen and respond to customer requests for features and functions. That is a pretty complicated product, but once you take into account the combinatorics around endpoints and network conditions and all the different features and functions that people might want to have, and whether it's audio or video or screen sharing, and what if somebody else wants to share their screen, there's a lot of complexity in the product that they managed to make just unbelievably beautifully simple, because they are always listening to their customers and always reacting by making the product better. And they couldn't do that if they didn't really, really care about delivering happiness. And so that's part of the magic, is just that, that culture. It just so happens that they have exactly the right people to do the job, but the culture that's wrapped around those people is super powerful.
I was just, because of course we shoot the show and then the show comes out several weeks later. And so, A, because of that, and B, in general, I can hide my own Easter eggs anyways. I get to sort of relive the show when it comes out because I forget most of it. And, the number of times he brings up happiness is absolutely mind-blowing. He's so charming and so genuine. And I just kept thinking, where did you come from?
Eric's a good, we mentioned, like, we ask ourselves the question, if this is the only company you get to partner with in the next couple of years, are you happy? Right? Like, Eric's a good example of that kind of founder. If you look at our partner, Carl Eschenbach, who's been here for about a year now, every enterprise company we run into would love to have Carl on the board, because Carl has such unique experience in scaling a go-to-market from 0 to 5 billion in revenue, which not a lot of people have done. And he's a wonderful guy to boot. And the only board that Carl has joined in his year as a partner at Sequoia is Eric's at Zoom, because Eric is super special and the company is super special. And that's kind of what we're looking for.
But to your point about that, you could hang out with them like you could the guy running the lawnmower business. I'd say, like, just to show you how important this authenticity factor is, or give you a representation of it. We just got back from spending 2 days in the wilderness with our founders. We do this base camp event where we take our founders and we go camping in the woods with them, and we have sessions where we share best practices with each other, and we give them founder only time to talk about things going on in their business. We invite people who have been part of the Sequoia family or ecosystem, or who are connected with us in some way, to come speak and share experiences. General McChrystal has come and spoken with us actually each of the last 2 years. But the fact that people around our ecosystem, people who have been tremendously successful, like Eric, taking time to just coach and help out young people with just an idea who've just raised their seed financing through Sequoia, sitting around sharing lunch, or people like Brian Chesky, who are there sharing the table with people like Frank Slootman, who have totally different perspectives and styles, but both bring us tremendous amount of authenticity about how they solve the problem, approach their market, go after things. I mean, the reason that event works is because people all fit into this general authenticity bucket of being themselves, being comfortable with who they are, being passionate about the problems they're solving, putting that passion of the problems they solve above their own kind of personal interests or personal egos. And I think you saw it in that podcast you did with Eric, and I think you'd see it across our founders and entrepreneurs in the portfolio.
I love it. Well, if they're all like Eric, that would be mind-blowing.
They're all like Eric, but they have some. Eric's a pretty special guy.
And Colin and I would be remiss if we didn't ask you guys a little bit about what are the areas, what are the big new emerging categories or themes that you're seeing that you're excited about in the future and that you're looking to invest in?
Before you answer, I'd like to add to that question. There's a company that I've been a fan of for a long time that I imagine you might be interested in, and that's Zapier. And I'm wondering what your thoughts. Do you have your eye on that? And what are your thoughts there? I imagine you might be looking at them.
That's, so Zapier is a good company and theme that we have been paying attention to, and the theme is what we would call connective tissue. And by connective tissue, I guess what we mean is in a world where there are new apps being created every day and you're accessing them on a variety of platforms through a variety of endpoints, and the underlying compute and storage resources are somewhat fluid, probably in a public cloud somewhere. The stuff in the middle, and when I say stuff in the middle, I'm intentionally ambiguous in the definition. The stuff in the middle goes from being the dreaded middleware to actually being incredibly strategic, because it's one of the few things that you can actually standardize on in a world where the infrastructure is fluid and the apps are constantly changing. And the components of that stuff in the middle, or what we would call connective tissue, it's things like Confluent, where Matt's on the board, right? Confluent is the commercial company associated with Kafka, which is essentially the connective tissue in the microservices world. Or it's things like Okta, which is identity for the enterprise. And if you're trying to figure out what's the new perimeter for the enterprise, now that firewalls and traditional endpoint security have known gaps that open up, identity is a pretty darn good perimeter, right? And it's kind of the gatekeeper for access to any information you need to get your job done. So there are these things in that theme of connective tissue that we've been really interested in. And what's nice about Zapier, not only is integration super strategic, and I think MuleSoft has done a nice job kind of defining the category around cloud integration, but Zapier takes a similar approach, but makes it accessible to anybody. So, you know, even though Matt probably hasn't written any code for a decade, Matt could very easily create a couple of zaps to stitch together some applications and put a workflow on top of it. Even though I've never written any code in my life.
Are you saying if Matt can do it, anybody can do it? Is that what you just?
Anybody can do
Pretty
it.
much, given how hard it was for us to set up the conference room this morning.
Sorry, Matt. I mean, just wanted to make sure that he was coming for you with that one.
Oh,
Yeah.
Well, I was able to use Zapier to build a first working version of a product with paying customers.
Nice.
that's awesome.
So there you go. We use it internally. We use it for a ton of stuff internally.
I love it.
But thematically, you asked about just general categories we're interested in, themes that are emerging. To kind of go very, very high level, the last decade, particularly in the enterprise, has basically been defined by the transition from on-prem to cloud. That's now still only about 20% of the market cap associated with enterprise technology. And so you could say that there's still a lot left to be done in just cloud as a theme. But from a venture perspective, it's pretty mature because most
I just want to make sure 80% of the market cap in enterprise tech is still on-prem.
Still on-prem. You can cloud wash it however you want, but if you want to get down to where the actual revenue and earnings reside and the associated market cap, the vast majority of it is still coming from the on-prem world.
Yep. I'm not surprised, but I would have thought maybe a little bit further along by now, but holy upside, Batgirl.
And it's growing rapidly, so I might be off by a couple of points.
Yeah, sure.
But suffice to say, the vast majority of value is actually still in the on-prem world. That being said, from a venture perspective, that transition is pretty mature. And the reason comes down to category definition. If you just go through the buying centers of the enterprise, the transition has already happened in the sense that while the on-prem solutions may still generate dollars, we know who the category king is. They've already been crowned. And most of those companies are public today, or they're within a year or two of going public. But one way or another, that transition is somewhat mature. So then the question is, what's the next tectonic shift? If it was on-prem to cloud, it's cloud to what? And the answer there is still somewhat undefined. I think there's a lot of hype right now around AI, and that's probably the right general direction. You could argue that cloud enabled a whole new breed of experiences that are far better for the user because it kind of unlocked mobile, it kind of unlocked the browser, it kind of unlocked a bunch of endpoints that just provide easier access to a particular workflow or a particular set of information. Similarly, you can argue that AI is a massive enabler of the next generation of great experiences because it takes things from fundamentally dumb to fundamentally smart. Cloud changed the economics, it changed the distribution, it changed the accessibility for technology. It didn't make it smart. It's still the same, dumb old Salesforce automation product. It just happens to be delivered through the cloud and you pay for it as a subscription. in the next generation,
Hey, that built the tallest building west of Chicago. way awesome on the dumbness. So sign me up.
oh, wonderful business model and a wonderful business. But in terms of the product,
No, I'm just funning with you. I agree completely with what you're saying, and it's a very good way, I think, to think about sort of the progression that we're now in. So I was just funning with you.
Smart. On-prem to cloud was the last 10 years. Dumb to smart is the next 10 years.
And I think as we approach in the future, if we get closer to an AI world, one of the things we'll look back at the cloud as having done as being a pivotal change was that it aggregated all of our data in large pools, and that aggregation of data in large pools allowed us to learn from it, which enabled us to build systems that could become smart and could leverage that data in new ways. And so where previously enterprise information lived in silos in individual companies' data centers, the fact that companies like Salesforce or Microsoft or Google or whomever's delivering hosted applications down to customers are able to collect all that data in one central place and be able to learn from it, enables better product development and the ability to train intelligent systems to have more automation in the future than what has ever existed before by being completely distributed. The other trend I mentioned on it a little bit earlier in association with Docker that I'm super excited about is this whole shift in the way people are building software. That's really been driven by the release of the container, but it's a whole big change that really comes back to this principle of a new layer of abstraction. So we look on the infrastructure side, one of the biggest things that moves the ball forward is every time there's an introduction of a new layer of abstraction. There was a new layer of abstraction implemented when we went from mainframes to a client-server network type architecture. There was a new layer of abstraction that was implemented when we went to the public internet and the cloud and mobile. And there's a new layer of abstraction implemented in software development as we now have these containers, which allow for us to develop individual pieces of software that do very specific things. And rather than building a large piece of software that will do many things, by building lots of smaller pieces of software, you can have more specialization of efforts and more specialization of labor that allows for totally different economics around software development and the leverage from the work that you produce, and allows you to build systems that are far more resilient and far more scalable. And so every time we've seen one of these shifts
if I could just interrupt you, Matt, the interesting thing about what's happening here is, you tell me if this is the wrong way to think about it. It's everything you said that leads to then a high level of reusability and integration.
Yes.
So that I can take a component that was built by somebody in some other part of the world, and another component built by somebody in a different part of the world, and a component I built, and a component, et cetera, and I can essentially stitch together an application from components, and that stitched together application with whatever value that I add, other than just putting them together. But I'm able now to get to this place we've talked about for a long time in software development, which is to begin to assemble software, not build it from the ground up.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
And so I guess my question for you is, I think this is the most exciting thing going on the development side that I'm aware of. And we've talked about this for years, right? And software's gotten more and more along this path, but for my entire career, this has been a dialogue. And so why do you think this is such a big breakthrough, a big step forward?
Yeah, it's because we have standards that have come in now. And so before you have standards, it's hard to have specialization of labor or specialization of focus, right? And so the standards that have come in is APIs are now universally available and a very common standard that people are used to sharing information between applications. We now have the standard, the Docker container, that is a standard for encapsulating these microservices. And that's accelerated by the fact we have cloud architecture available, cloud-like architecture. We can quickly spool up and spin up environments with which to build and run applications rather than plotting servers into a rack.
So those are technical enablers, but I actually think there's something more powerful, which plays right into what you guys do, which is there's a word for it. In the last 12 or 18 months, the word microservices has been on the tip of the tongue of every single startup and every single big enterprise saying, oh shoot, what is microservices? How can we transition to microservices? How do we deploy microservices? Microservices have been around for a long time. In 2003, Amazon transition to microservices.
Yeah.
And so, yes, there are technical enablers that make it easier and more frictionless today to do it, but conceptually, it's been around for a very long time. It was 12 or 18 months ago that the name microservices all of a sudden was on top of everybody's mind, and kind of, it's not a category per se in the sense that there's a big microservices company that's making a bunch of money, but it is a category in the sense that every CTO or every chief architect or every engineering leader knows that they need to understand microservices because it's important. And that alone has kind of given it a lot of legs.
And if you guys would put it into context, I mean, would you say this is as significant a change is the componentization change that was enabled by Java in the early days of client server and Unix?
Absolutely.
Ultimately then lead to the internet? Is that what, so
If
is
not
this the, would you say
I'd say
microservices equal Java? I'm just looking for a comparison.
bigger.
Bigger.
If you want to talk about like structural change, right? One of the structural changes that's happened over the last few years, particularly in the consumer internet world, but it's bleeding over in the enterprise world, is the consolidation of power around the big five: Apple, Amazon, Facebook, Google, and Microsoft. If you want to look at Google and Amazon in particular, there is one thing that they've both been able to do that nobody else has really been able to do in the history of technology companies or of companies more generally, which is to increase the rate at which they innovate as they get faster. They've actually gotten better.
Hold on there, handsome.
As they get bigger.
Hold on. You said there's something really important. Increase the rate.
Increase the rate at which they innovate as they've gotten bigger.
As they've gotten bigger.
And there are two reasons for that.
And
One,
in the history of time, the percentage of companies that ever did that,
Exactly.
it wouldn't be a huge number.
The laws of physics say you can't do that.
You can't do it, right? Even redwoods can't go to Mars, right?
And there are two reasons they've been able to do that. One is the people inside the building and the culture that they operate in. But then the second one, believe it or not, is microservices, meaning they are not bogged down by the friction of disparate systems. They are not handcuffed by the size of their organization because they've architected their own infrastructure in such a way that an individual developer can act with the agility of a startup, not just as one of 10,000 developers who are all inside this massive organization. And so that, I think microservices has given them the agility to innovate at scale, which has resulted in hundreds of billions of dollars of additional market cap. And so you could say that because it gave them that, it's actually a more impactful change than almost anything else we've seen. And that's why it's important to all the startups, is because they realize that as startups get bigger, they start to slow down. And if you get the architecture right, you can actually speed up as you get bigger.
The other thing that's interesting about what you're saying is on the economic side. So what you're describing is what I've got taught is an increasing returns business. So if you think about in the beginning, we're investing ahead of revenue, right? And then you get to some place where hopefully infrastructure cost, investment, and revenue meet each other. And then as revenue starts to build, in order to meet the demand of that revenue, infrastructure cost goes with it, right? And that happens in the beginning. But in a quote unquote normal business, revenue and expenses are fairly tied. And maybe you can increase margins and everybody works on that, and that's great. But for the most part, if you increase revenue by $1, you increase expenses by 30 cents or whatever it is, right? What you're describing is not that. Is that there's some point in time where that's true in the beginning, and then there comes a point where as the revenue increases, the commensurate expense dollars on the operations side doesn't increase. As a matter of fact, you can stack a whole lot of revenue on top of it with very little increase in expense, and therefore, as the business grows, it's an increasing returns business.
Yeah, it becomes far less expensive to maintain and iterate and improve upon a system that's distributed leveraging microservices.
And margins increases as revenue increases.
Continue to operate a monolith. And our portfolio companies see that. They go through a step function. When our portfolio companies get going, they all are building these monolithic large applications because they're trying to just hurry and solve for what they have and quickly get something to market in an efficient way. And they all go through a point where they reach a certain level of scale, and then they say, okay, it's time to learn from these best practices, these bigger tech companies, and build our product leveraging microservices. And the costs actually go down as they begin to pair it off and put into these services of maintaining and operating that core service, because it's far more resilient and they're able to leverage common components far more efficiently. Now, what usually happens too is they find other areas they'd like to build and grow, and new products they'd like to pursue with those same R&D dollars. But the operating of that core service becomes far more cost efficient, and moving that core service forward becomes far more cost efficient than it was as a monolith.
Awesome. Well, guys, I know we've had you for an extraordinary discussion. Before we kick out of this one, is there anything else that you'd like to share?
Trying to think. I don't know.
Who's your barber?
Oh, good question. Good question.
Where'd you get that green jacket?
That's a good one. So actually, this is a good point.
Or is that a sweater? I'm not sure. It's very green though.
There's actually
because you're in the money business, you wear green all the time?
I do. So green is a Sequoia color, and it's also a bright and noticeable color. And the reason that I wear a lot of Sequoia green is, one, because I bleed green, which means I love Sequoia, and that shows up in everything I do. But then the other reason, we were talking about this the other day, and this is kind of category design, but we're trying to figure out, okay, how can I be more memorable? Because if you look at me, I'm about the most generic looking human being you've ever seen. I could literally be anybody, right? And so if I meet with a founder and then a couple years later I meet that founder again, they have no recollection whatsoever that we ever met. And so the options were, I could wear bright green every time I go in. At least people are like, oh, that's that guy. He wore that same ugly jacket last time. Or I could get a face tattoo. And so this is kind of like the lesser evil between the two.
How did those become the choices though? Well,
I couldn't think of
you could have Mike Tyson's tattoo, or you could wear green. There wasn't a third choice.
I guess I could have purple hair or something like that. Something to be memorable.
Hey, you could have shaved your head.
Shave my head, yeah, that could do it.
All right, well, you can have your green sweater.
I like the green sweater.
Yeah, I think you should stay with it. It's your thing. It's your thing now. It's like John Wayne shouldn't change his name back to Marion once you get it going. Just stick with it.
Now you have to wear green forever.
Forever.
And what about you, Matt? Anything else before we wrap?
No, I can't think of anything else.
All right. Well, for Colin and I, we just want to thank you guys.
Thank you.
It's an extraordinary thing that the two of you would come and have this dialogue with us and share what you've shared today. And you've been incredibly generous, incredibly fun, and tolerant of my mischievous interruptions.
Well, thank you guys. We're big fans of what you do and all the thought leadership that you've produced over the years. We're big believers in the category design philosophy, so it's an honor and a pleasure to be on the show.
Thank you.
Well, that warms all of the cockles of my heart to hear that. No, thank you. That's incredible coming from you guys, and it's awesome to spend some time with the young guns.
It's great to see you guys. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
There it is. I kind of always want to say, whoop, there it is. There it is, man. If you don't like that dialogue, I don't know what to do anymore. Thank you so much to both Pat and Matt for being on Legends and Losers and sharing so much in such an awesome way. If you like this episode, you'll love episode 24. With the legendary partner and chief marketing officer of Sequoia Capital, Blair Shane. She's an incredible marketing leader. She has incredible insights into startups in the VC world. And I love doing that one with her. We would like to thank you for checking us out and ask you to subscribe on legendsandlosers.com. You can check us out on iTunes, Stitcher, or YouTube. I'm always curious, are you listening or are you watching? I'm assuming most people are listening, but if you're watching, Send an email to blackhole@legendsandlosers.com and tell us how you like the video show on YouTube. Always curious about that. And the other thing I'm curious to find out, if you want to, while you're emailing, tell us where you listen to Legends and Losers. Is it the gym or in the car or when you're up to something nefarious or what it is? We love it when you give us iTunes, Stitcher, or YouTube reviews. Keep those coming. They fuel podcast growth. You can find us on facebook.com/groups/legends and losers, on Twitter @legendslosers. And again, the email is blackhole@legendsandlosers.com. We would like to thank Equity Directory, connecting startups to the talent and resources they need to build legendary businesses. The instant classic from HarperCollins, Play Bigger, How Pirates, Dreamers, and Innovators Create and Dominate Markets. OneLifeFullyLived.org, the nonprofit that helps you dream, plan, and live your best life. Spiro, the sales app for salespeople and sales managers who like to make money, at spiro.ai. Our good friends at NetSuite, #1 in cloud ERP. And if you're a regular listener, you know I'm on tour this late summer and early fall in North America with NetSuite. For information, go to legendsandlosers.com or send email to blackhole@legendsandlosers, and we'll get a VIP invite out to you. Chi Power Arts Healing in Santa Cruz, California at chipowerarts.com. MSF, or known here as Doctors Without Borders. You send us a donation, and we help the people in the worst parts of the world. Our good friends at Myo Technology in beautiful San Jose, California. Mixed Method Recovery. This is the way to get your body tuned up and healed up. Visit myotechnology.com. The smash hit podcast from our friend John Lee Dumas, Entrepreneur on Fire. And I was stoked to be on an episode of Entrepreneur on Fire recently. WWF, the World Wildlife Fund. Don't forget, animals are people too. Fathom, legendary digital marketing at fathomdelivers.com. Our good friends at Interview Valet, the leading podcast interview marketing agency and the official booking agent for Christopher Lochhead. And speaking of official people who we work with, Pursuing Results, the producers of legendary podcasts, and this one. And never forget the beautiful Montreal, Canada. We have the smoked meat and the bagels. Today's information is provided you solely for informational purposes. This oddcast is the sole property of the Legends and Losers Oddcast Network, and we'd ask you to please share the shit out of it. We do need to warn you, this oddcast is produced in a studio that contains nuts. We'd like to remind you to support your venture capitalist. Remember that the left lane is the passing lane. Thank you to Dandy Candy. Never turn your back on the ocean. Legends and Losers makes your butt look awesome. Remember to tell 2 friends about 2 podcasts that you love. Don't dry children in microwaves. And hey, Colin, this oddcast really ties the room together, doesn't it? Our deepest apologies go out today to Gwyneth Paltrow. Sorry, Gwen, we just ran out of time for you. That's it. Be legendary, my friends, and we'll see you next time on Legends and Losers.